Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study and Happy New Year. I pray and believe this is going to be your best one ever. A couple announcements, just one announcement really. I will be preaching again, and I promised the healing place that I would do my first sermon there in February 19th, the 11 o'clock service. I'll be preaching there, so we want to invite everyone that can come to be there. Let's start off with in the news tonight. And as we go into the news and do the New World Order, one of our categories, terror victims sue the Biden administration for funding Palestinian Authority. Victims of Palestinian terror are suing the Biden administration for awarding millions of dollars to the Palestinian Authority, which pays terrorists and their families. The lawsuit, filed in the U.S. District Court on Tuesday in Texas, contends that Biden administration is violating the 2018 Taylor Force Act, which prohibits the executive branch from providing funds to the Palestinian Authority, due to its practice primarily for pay for slay, as paying salaries to terrorists serving in Israeli prisons, as well as to their families of deceased terrorists. It's an incentive, obviously, to commit acts of terror. In July, the Biden administration paid $316 million in additional funding to support Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority, pays $300 million annually in monthly stipends and benefits of terrorists and their families of what they call martyrs, those killed in the act of carrying out attacks against the Jews. Now, I've been to Gaza, and I can tell you that the income level is extremely poverty-ridden. The income level is very, very low. So when you pay terrorists, you're incentivizing them to continue to commit crimes. But Biden obviously doesn't care about that. Let me give you a little bit more, and that's that picture for Biden with Mohammed Abbas. Let me give you a little bit more. The growing call for a global government and a world leader. Any of you who have listened to my Revelation study understands that the Antichrist is on his way. A global leader is what the whole world is looking for. It appears that the United States and several other countries, this article says, that historically have called themselves democracies, are in the eras of late longing for a stronger and stronger leader. Not a president, but more like a king. And those leaders who do already rule countries with almost absolute authority are not really qualified to take these ultimate positions because they inevitably end up falling into megalomania. For example, Russia's Vladimir Putin started off as national president, but then eventually became a dictator for life. Now he sees himself as an emissary for God with a divine purpose and calling to reunite Russian and Ukrainian orthodoxy. You really need to hear this message. It's pretty amazing and ironic. The end step is the path towards megalomania. It usually is to declare oneself as a god or even the god. We see this pattern throughout history. There are many examples. Megalomania is almost the default tendency of mankind. We see it from Nimrod, who used his descendants to try to create the Tower of Babel. In recent years, we've seen Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and the premier in China right now. We know that Mr. Xi is obviously heading in the same direction. So throughout human history, there's been an Alexander the Great, a Genghis Khan, and a Napoleon. Napoleon was such a megalomaniac that he didn't even deem anybody else worthy of crowning him. So he crowned himself as the Emperor of France. But now, supporters of a new era of kings are actually suggesting that we need a single great world leader, such as a Führer of Nazi Germany, to embrace worldwide. It's hoped that this messianic figure will lead the nations out of our economic woes. I believe this tide is setting the world up for the prophesied Antichrist. The Bible prophesied that in the end times, the Roman Empire would revive and rise again. What's interesting is that for hundreds of years, the Roman Empire started as a republic, just like the United States. They had representative senators, and some citizens could vote. Shockingly enough, the Romans traded the republic for an emperor. Why? Because Caesar could get things done. A lot of people are tired of the challenges in getting a decent law passed through our legislature. Congress is locked and basically supporting themselves and not the public. So America is crying for a leader that would do it. We've been letting 9 Supreme Court justices decide all of our laws in the land. Imagine, all we need to do is get 8 less, and you'll have 1 supreme leader. Likewise, our presidents have begun making law by executive order, such as Biden attempting to erase hundreds of billions of dollars of student loan debt, even though the executive branch doesn't have that kind of authority and can't do it according to the Constitution. Yet he's still trying to do that. So we have this misguided hope that's everywhere. This coming global leader, whoever he will be, whether he starts off already satanically inspired, will eventually be possessed by Satan himself at the midpoint in what we call tribulation. And so the power will inevitably go to his head. By the middle of the coming 7-year tribulation period, he will demand that the entire world would worship him. The Antichrist will be the ultimate megalomaniac, and almost every country in the world is setting themselves up for him. It's coming. It's prophecy, and it's coming. Let me give you a little bit about Israel. Speaking of prophecy, Ezekiel's bones live. Dramatic increase in those making aliyah to Israel, to go back home. Some 70,000 people from 95 different countries immigrated to Israel in 2022 by the assistance of the Jewish Agency for Israel. It was the most in 23 years, from an increase from about 2021 when 28,000 arrived. Now imagine, 28,000 was the highest in 2021. Now it's 70,000, 37,000 from Russia, 15,000 from the Ukraine, 4,000 from North America, 2,000 from France, 2,000 from Belarus, 2,000 from Ethiopia. We know that the ranges of the people making aliyah, the Jews, 0 to 17 years old, 22%, are between 36 and 50 years old, 14%. And we see that 51 to 64, 13%. It was a dramatic year. Aliyah is of existential importance to the state of Israel. It's also of existential importance to prophecy. God said, I will gather you from the four winds, from the four directions. So we know that it's a partnership, a strategic partnership between Israel and worldly Jewry. It is predicted by the year 2048, should we be there that long, the 100th anniversary of the state of Israel, 2/3 of the world's Jewish population, about 12 million people, will live in Israel. That's amazing considering the fact that Israel didn't become a nation until 1948. Let me give you a little bit more going on with prophecy, and this one has to do with the economy, and I'm going to be honest with you, you're being lied to. Our economy is not going to get better, it's only going to get worse, and I'm not a harbinger of bad news, but I've read all the economic reports, I see the trends, and I'm getting one article after another, such as this one. 15 facts which prove that a massive economic meltdown is already happening. So economic conditions just keep getting worse. The following are 15 facts that prove that a massive economic meltdown is already happening right now. Number 1, existing home sales have now fallen for 10 consecutive months. 2, existing home sales are down 35% over the past 12 months, largest year over year ever. 3, home builder sentiment has now dropped for 12 consecutive months. 4, home construction costs have risen more than 30% since the beginning of 2022. 5, the number of single-family housing unit permits has fallen for 9 straight months in a row. 6, the Empire State Manufacturing Index has plunged to a reading of negative 11.2 in December. That figure was way below expectations. 7, in November, we witnessed the largest decline in real estate sales that we have seen all year long. Number 8, even the biggest names on Wall Street are starting to let people go. In fact, Goldman Sachs are soon going to lay off approximately 4,000 employees. 5, the Federal Reserve is admitting that the number of actual jobs in the United States has been overstated by 1 million. 10, U.S. job cuts were 417% higher in November than they were during the same month a year ago. 11, a recent Wall Street Journal survey found that approximately 2/3 of all Americans expect the economy to get even worse this year. 12, 70% of economists believe a recession is coming in 2023. 13, inflation continues to spiral wildly out of control. At this point, a head of lettuce now costs $11 at one grocery store in California. 14, overall vegetable prices in the United States are more than 80% higher than they were at this same time last year. 15, thanks to the rapidly rising cost of living, 63% of U.S. population are now living paycheck to paycheck. That one really hit me because a couple of months ago I told you it was 50% and I was shocked. Now it's up 13 more percent. But meanwhile, our politicians in Washington are busy creating more inflation by borrowing and spending money at a rate that's absolutely unprecedented in our entire history. I remember when our national debt was $13 trillion. It's topping $35 trillion right now, and that's only a couple years ago that it was that way. This week, an abominable $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill is being rammed through Congress, both sides, but not a single member of Congress has read it. The bill is 4,155 pages long. And U.S. Senator Rand Paul just held a brief press conference briefing during which he wheeled it out on a trolley. He wheeled the bill out on a trolley. He called it an abomination, demanded to know how anyone would be able to read it before the end of the week when the vote came. Paul, along with only other dissenting Senate Republican Mike Braun, Ron Johnson, Mike Lee, and Rick Scott, they're the only ones, 5 of them, highlighted how ludicrous the fast-tracking the bill has been. Unfortunately, this absurd spending bill has broad support on both sides of the aisle, and that just shows how really broken Washington has become. Our system of government has failed time after time. Think of my last article. If our government's failing, if our leaders are failing, we're going to cry, not me, but the world's going to cry, especially the United States, for a one world leader. Our politicians continue to spend money on some of the most ridiculous things imaginable. The following examples were pulled out of the $1.7 billion omnibus spending bill were discovered by Heritage Foundation. $2 million for LGBTQIA and Pride centers. $2 million for services for DACA recipients, aka helping illegal aliens with taxpayer funds. $477,000 for the Equity Institute in Rhode Island to indoctrinate teachers with that anti-racism virtual labs. $2 million for Zora House in Ohio, a co-working and community space for women and gender-expansive people of color. $4 million for the American LGBTQ Museum in New York City. $750,000 for the LGBT and gender non-conforming housing in Albany, New York. Next one should really bother you. $4 million for Michelle Obama Trail in Georgia. $1 million for the LGBT Center in New York. No matter who we send to Washington, the story remains the same. The Fed can send interest rates into the stratosphere, but inflation will continue to remain high because our politicians insist on showering this nation with giant mountains of cash. We should all be deeply, deeply offended by what is happening in Washington, but most Americans simply don't care enough, or they don't even know. But once economic conditions get even worse than they were in 2008 and 2009, the majority of the U.S. population will become extremely angry. And if I know anything about the news and history, Americans don't react until it's too late. Well, it's almost too late. We are watching something destroy our economy and destroy our nation. Let me give you another economic indicator of an article. 11 ominous predictions for 2023. Man, I wish I could bring you some great economic news, but I can't. I would have to fabricate it and make it up. There's a growing consensus that 2023, this article says, is going to be a miserable year for the U.S. economy and for the global economy as a whole. Again, think of a one world leader pulling all the economies together. In fact, I've never seen so many big names on Wall Street so incredibly pessimistic about this coming year. The cryptocurrency industry imploded. Trillions of dollars in stock market wealth evaporated. Inflation became a major problem all over the industrialized world, and a new housing crash suddenly erupted. The experts have a negative view of 2023. Here's 11 ominous warnings that they've issued for the next year. Number 1, the IMF. We expect 1/3 of the world's economy to be in recession. 1/3. Even countries that are not in recession right now. Number 2, Bloomberg. Economists say there is a 7 to 10 likelihood that the U.S. economy will shrink into recession in 2025. Number 3, the World Bank. And these are quotes. As central banks across the world simultaneously hike interest rates in response to inflation, the world may be edging towards a global recession in 2023 and a string of financial crises in emerging markets and developing economies that would do them lasting harm, according to a comprehensive new study by the World Bank. 4, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan. We're going to have a shallow recession. Number 5, Mohammed El-Iran. Many high conviction U.S. recession calls are immediately coupled with the assertion it'll be short and shallow. Reminds me of the behavioral trap, transitory inflation proponents fell into last year. Nouriel Roubini. These are all well-known economists. No, this is not going to be a short and shallow recession. It's going to be deep and protracted. Larry Summers. My sense is that much harder than many people think to achieve a soft landing. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon. Economic growth is slowing. When I talk to our debt clients, they sound extremely cautious. Number 9, Charles Schwab. We have to take our medicine still, meaning a weaker economy and a weaker labor market. The question is it better to take our medicine sooner or later? BlackRock. Central bankers won't ride to the rescue when growth slows in this new regime, contrary to what investors have come to expect. Number 11, Michael Berry. Inflation peaked, but it's not at its last peak of this cycle. We are likely to see CPI lower, possibly negative, and in the 2023, and the U.S. recession by any other definition. The Feds will cut, government will stimulate, and we will have another inflation spike. It's not hard to imagine. With each passing day, we continue to get even more numbers that indicate big trouble is ahead. For example, luxury home sales absolutely cratered during the months of September, October, and November, down 40% in one year over another. Overall housing market lost momentum in 2022 due to many of the same factors: inflation, high interest rates, a sagging stock market, and recession fears. We haven't seen anything like this since the crash of 2008. Normally, the beginning of a calendar year is a time for optimism. Everybody loves a new year and the turn of a year. As we look forward to a completely clean slate, it can be easy to forget the difficulties of the past 12 months. But this year, things seem to be completely different. Decades of very, very foolish decisions are starting to catch up with us in a major way. Our politicians in Washington keep borrowing and spending trillions upon trillions of dollars that we do not have, and they definitely delayed our day of reckoning. The Federal Reserve kept the financial markets artificially propped up for years by endlessly pumping giant mountains of fresh cash into the system. But such foolish measures only make our long-term problems even worse. And now our leaders are losing control. All of the mega bubbles are starting to burst, and the system is beginning to fall apart all around us. It's time to turn out the lights because the party in America is over. We had a lot of fun while it lasted, but now the bill is due, and an extraordinary amount of pain is ahead. Those are dire warnings of our economy. So what do I say about that? What instruction can I give you? Get out of debt as fast as you possibly can. The worst place you want to find yourself in a recession is in a mountain of debt, because I'll tell you what, somebody will buy up that debt and you'll be the one paying for it. Let me give you a little bit of what's going on with the war. Who will start the first major war of 2023? We know that tensions are high all over the planet, and a global conflict will be one of the big trends that we will be watching in 2023. Notice how all these articles I'm giving you are tying together. It looks like we need someone, or the world needs someone to orchestrate a peace, to bring the economies back in line, to bring war to an end. And this is exactly what the Revelator John told us. This is exactly what the prophets in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel have told us about the end times. Unfortunately, because more global conflict won't be good for any one of us, people are going to reach out for a global leader. Considering what we have been through the past several years, we really need a time of peace. Sadly, it appears that more war is inevitable. So where will it start? Will it be Serbia? Things haven't been this tense between Serbia and Kosovo since Bill Clinton was president. The president of Serbia has just raised the alert level of his military to the highest level of combat readiness. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić says he's going to protect Serbian areas in northern Kosovo, and he says they're under threat, northern Serbia, they're under threat from Kosovo. But I don't think Serbia will be the first, even though the tensions are extremely high. Will it be North Korea? Well, just a few years ago, things were going to be much better with North Korea. Remember? We actually had President Trump stepping over the line and shaking Kim Jong-un's hand, and basically all their rocket launches stopped. But now with Joe Biden in the White House, any hope for a lasting peace has gone out the window. The North Koreans have been getting increasingly aggressive, and this week they actually sent a drone almost all the way to South Korea, to the capital, Seoul. In response, the South Korean military flew surveillance assets into North Korea. South Korea's military fired warning shots, scrambled fighter jets, and flew surveillance assets across the heavily fortified border with North Korea on Monday, after North Korean drones violated its airspace for the first time in 5 years in a fresh escalation of tensions. The North Koreans were trying to probe South Koreans' defenses. If it keeps happening, South Korea is promising to, quote, thoroughly and resolutely respond. Tensions along the militarized border have already been high due to Pyongyang's firing off a record number of ballistic and other missiles this year, including a pair fired last week towards Japan. Analysts have tracked over 90 missiles fired so far this year. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula are the highest they've been in decades. But I don't think the war is going to start in North Korea. Will it be China? This week, China sent 71 planes and 70 ships towards Taiwan in just a 24-hour period. China has already said that it will take Taiwan, but I don't think it's going to be China. My personal opinion is a major conflict is ready to erupt. Will it be Iran? For years, Benjamin Netanyahu pledged that he would never, never, never allow the Iranians to build their own nuclear weapons. Well, the IAEA claims that the Iranians are now one technical step away from enriching weapons-grade uranium. So it is put up or shut up for Netanyahu. Either he takes military action or he lives with a nuclear Iran. Of course, if Israel launches an attack on Iran, the Iranians will hit back extremely hard. In fact, the Iranians just threatened to raze Tel Aviv to the ground if Israel decides to attack. In a chilling video explaining how Tehran would respond to an Israeli strike on its nuclear facilities, they said, 2.5-minute video posted by MEMRI contains violent footage of missiles going off and several terrifying explosions to demonstrate what would happen to Tel Aviv. Once this war starts, it's going to be incredibly destructive. But I don't think that'll start the way most people are expecting. Meanwhile, I believe that things in the Ukraine are about to get even more interesting. On Monday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov issued a statement that some media sources are describing as an ultimatum. The point is simple: fulfill them for your own good. Otherwise, the issue will be decided by the Russian army, he told Ukraine. If Russians launch another massive invasion of the Ukraine from the north, there will be no going back. If Vladimir Putin pulls the trigger, there will be no hope for a peaceful solution. Meanwhile, the Russians continue to try to frame this conflict as a great battle between good and evil. Now really listen to this. You're going to see the irony here. And you're going to see how bad off America is by just what Vladimir Putin is saying. Listen to it, because this is something I promise you haven't heard on any news media. He believes that this battle is between good and evil, Vladimir Putin believes. In fact, a commercial has just been released that portrays Vladimir Putin as a Santa Claus figure that is delivering a boy from the twisted values of the Western world. That's Europe and the United States. Now listen again closely. The film made by a production company called Signal depicts Santa Putin swapping a photograph of a child's same-sex parents for one of a mother and father, and gifting the boy being raised as a girl a football, toys, toy cars, and a drum kit. The video feeds into Russian prejudices about Europe and the United States, which have been fueled by pro-Kremlin propagandists during the war in Ukraine to frame the conflict as a clash of values between Russia and Ukraine's Western allies. What does it mean? The Russians consider themselves to be the good guys. They want to stand up for the nuclear family, a mother and a father. They're against LGBTQ. They're against homosexuality. They're against transgenderism. This is Russia. They're against everything that our woke society in America is for, and Europe. And they believe that the Western powers, us, are an existential threat to the future of civilization. Man, listen to this. Meanwhile, the Biden administration and the Western European elite also consider themselves to be the good guys, but they believe that the Russians must be crushed at all costs. Perhaps we should pull back from the precipice before the missiles start firing. All of these nations are nuclear capable. Rational leaders would be looking for a peaceful way out of this mess. Sadly, rational behavior among our leaders is in very short supply at this point. You know, I said something years and years ago, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't believe in war. I don't believe in killing other people that you don't even know. I don't believe we should be fighting the wars in the world. But here's what I do believe. If a country wants to go and a leader wants to go to war with another country, then those leaders should fight. We should have Vladimir Putin fighting Joe Biden. But if that was the case, we'd be electing Arnold Schwarzenegger as our president. I don't believe you should put men in harm's way for political gain. But what we're watching right now is a civilization turnover. We're watching Russia become moral, and I'm using that very loosely. At least they're standing behind those morals to justify what they're doing. And we've watched America become immoral. And I am not using that term loosely. I'm using it literally. So you can see how messed up our world is. And you can see that a one world leader is the one that everybody's crying for. And these are some amazing in the news for you tonight, whether we want to hear them or not. This one is also from war. On December 1st, 2022, Britain's Office for National Statistics released the latest 10-year census. Actually, this one is right here. And I'm going to read you this one. This is under religion. For the first time in a census of England and Wales, less than half the population described themselves as Christian. This is the first time ever, by the way. The Muslim community in Britain reacted otherwise. They said that there's non-Christians, but the Muslim community said that's not true. Zahra Mohammed, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, said this: while the census does look at religion, how accurate and acute the issue of underrepresentation of Muslim is in the British society. These initial figures give us the opportunity now to make meaningful changes and create a better Britain for all. The census taken, those claiming no religion rose by 12 points. Those identifying as Muslims rose by 6 points. And so Buddhists overtook Jews in England. Within Britain, all the divergent schools of Islam are present. Trevor Phillips, former head of Britain's Commission for Racial Equality and Equity, said Muslims are creating nations within nations. So Muslims in the UK appear more religious than most other religious groups, while fewer Christians are becoming church members and appear to be losing their faith, describing themselves as atheists and non-religious. Most Muslims in Britain strictly follow their religion. London shows the lowest share of Christian residents due to having the highest percentage of Muslims, who make up 23% of the area's respondents. Church of England has been in decline for over 30 years. And that decline appears to have accelerated over the last decade. In 2012, Muhammad had emerged as the commonest first name given by baby boys in London. The name was also second commonest among newborn male babies across the United Kingdom, Wales the same year. Most Muslim children in the UK learn to read the Quran in Arabic. And in addition to the Quran in Arabic, many Muslim supplementary schools offer other aspects of Islamic studies, as well as formal instruction in an ethnic language and culture. The question is, what teachings are the Muslims across the world, including the UK, America, are receiving from the study of the Quran? Well, the Quran does not tolerate any polytheistic, pagan, Christian, Jew, idolater, or atheist. The latter group, the Muslims, are now increasing in Britain, according to the census. So, let's go a little bit further and give you a ridiculous article. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, promotes ranking scores for schools' LGBT acceptance and promotion. Now, excuse me, I thought the CDC was about disease. I thought it was about pandemics and epidemics. Now they're dictating to schools about LGBTQ. Just days after Christmas, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention republished a self-assessment tool urging teachers, administrators, school health staff, and others to become an awesome ally by advocating for LGBT causes in school. And I'm quoting, "School administrators, our LGBTQ inclusively self-assessment tool can help you quickly gauge inclusivity at your school." The CDC's Division of Adolescence and School Health posted on Twitter on Tuesday. See your score today and learn ways to increase inclusivity. Are you kidding me? That score means that that's going to go into the national government, and the government's going to decide whether they can subsidize any of these schools. We're watching it crunch all the way around us, get us to a point where the government will be promoting this using every agency they possibly can. It also encouraged leaders to advocate for LGBTQ inclusiveness and affirming materials in all schools nationwide and classroom environments, and to participate in the school's Gay-Straight Alliance. So we're watching this document, which would urge teachers to describe anatomy and physiology separate from gender. And by the way, they're not, but that's what they're advocating. Parents have urged schools to remove certain books from libraries, such as Mail Kobabe's Gender Queer memoir. Although the book includes pictures of sexual acts between a boy and a man, a Fairfax County Public Schools committee defended the book, saying it depicts difficulties non-binary and asexual individuals may face. The committee concluded that the book neither depicts nor describes pedophilia, which it does, but parents have contested this assertion. So it's going to happen more and more. Here is some good news in this article, by the way. While many national health organizations support experimental transgender medical interventions in the name of gender-affirming care, medical organizations both in the United States and around the world are reversing their course. This is good news. The Florida Board, the Board of Medicine and the Florida Board of Osteopathic Medicine last month approved a new ruling banning puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and transgender surgeries for minors. It's about time. Karolinska Hospital in Sweden announced in May 2022 that it would not prescribe hormonal treatments to minors under 16. In June 2022, Finland released medical guidelines opposing such drugs for minors, noting cross-sex identification in childhood, even in extreme cases, generally disappears during puberty. Man, listen to this. It's ammunition against a transgender society. In April 2022, Britain's National Institute of Health and Care Excellence concluded that the evidence for using puberty-blocking drugs to treat young people is, quote, extremely low, and that existing studies of the drugs were small and subject to bias and confounding, which is amazing because America, CDC, is promoting it while countries all over the world is denouncing it, which leads me to my next article. And this article is pretty, I can't read you all of it, but it's pretty amazing. Under the radar, the detransitioning movement is surging. With the explosive phenomenon of gender dysphoria continuing to ripple across America's youth, a related but much less highlighted trend is simultaneously occurring. A movement almost completely ignored by the mainstream media. New studies are now emerging showing that the detransitioning movement is far larger than was commonly acknowledged, with detransitioning rates nearing 40% in some instances. Detransitioning. Someone is a male, they think they're a female, they go through all the hormone blockers, they go through all the sex changes, and now they want to come back as a male because it didn't work, because something happened to them. The phenomenon of gender dysphoria, the condition of being mentally distressed due to a perceived mismatch between one's gender identity and one's biological sex, has seen a colossal increase among children in the United States over the last 5 years. But thousands of young women and men who once identified as the opposite sex, many who attempted a gender transition by ingesting drugs, undergoing elaborate surgical procedures to impersonate the opposite sex, are now rejecting the transgender identity and are once again embracing their natural sex. As reported by the Post-Millennial, new studies are showing that the rate of individuals who detransition away from trans identity is occurring at paces that far exceed what the legacy media is reporting. What the media is reporting. Researchers presented a number of studies that showed detransitioning rates ranging from 12% to almost 40%. 774 young Canadians and Americans revealed that 16% had halted gender treatments, citing health concerns, change in identity, and cost. In 2022, it was the 9th most visited website in the world, DTrans. It was a chat room which currently has over 40,000 members, people wanting to get out of having a sex change. Online accounts and testimonies of young women and men who've detransitioned from pursuing a gender transition opposite for their biological sex have exploded in the past 5 years. Cultural, institutional influences beholden to a pro-transgender ideology have become primary contributors to the confusion over biological sex that is occurring among thousands and thousands of adolescents. And I'm going to give you a sample. There's 20 testimonies in this article. I'm not going to give all of them to you, but every one of them is absolutely shocking. Daisy Strongen spent 7 years from ages 15 to 22 attempting to transition from female to male. It began when she immersed herself on the internet due to depression from low self-esteem. I won't read you everything she said. I'll just go a little bit further. She did this because she felt isolated, and the internet was instrumental in trying to get her to transition. Casey Miller began taking testosterone at 16 and underwent a double mastectomy only 6 months after starting the injections. She says that she was introduced to gender ideology through the influences of YouTube. All these things I'm going to tell you have detransitioned. She decided to detransition. Chloe Cole went on puberty blockers and testosterone at just 13 years old. She'd been diagnosed with autism and ADHD at age 7 and spent a lot of unsupervised time online where she was exposed to gender ideology. Can you see the trend? Helena Kirshner struggled with depression, isolation, self-harm, and an eating disorder, and social suicidal thoughts as a young teen. At 13, she was exposed to gender ideology through Tumblr, social media. At 18, she began taking testosterone and soon began having fits of uncontrollable anger, eventually resorting to go into a psych unit where she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and psychosis. 17 months later, she decided to stop taking testosterone and her symptoms immediately disappeared. She noted that no medical professionals suggested that the hormones could be causing the symptoms. Camille Kiefel, she experienced a traumatic event in her childhood, and she subsequently felt uncomfortable and vulnerable as a female and desired to look more androgynous. After being exposed to gender identity ideology in college, she began to identify as a non-binary. After only 2 appointments with mental health workers, they recommended she receive a double mastectomy. The procedure caused her to suffer from acute distress, and she is now suing the healthcare professionals for what she calls an abhorrent misdiagnosis. I just don't want that happen to me to happen to someone else, she says. And on the testimonies go. Let me give you one of these. Walt Heyer was dressed in girls' clothes at 4 years old boy repeatedly by his grandmother. He was later sexually abused by his uncle, which made him not want to be male. He would cross-dress and wish he was a girl. As an adult, he began living 2 separate lives as a married man and a cross-dresser. He eventually decided to undergo both top and bottom gender transition surgery at age 40, and his marriage soon ended. After 8 years of living as a woman, he found himself still distressed about his gender identity. He eventually got counseling for his emotional trauma and received healing. He detransitioned at 50 and now provides support to other detransitioners through numerous authored books and his ministry. Our secular culture is evil. It's demonic. It's full of distractions. Luca Hine, Laura Becker, Abel Garcia. I'm giving just the names. I'm not telling you their stories. Desney Hessen, Michelle Oliva, Adriana Amour, Jeffrey McCall. Let me tell you this last one. Jeffrey McCall. He was bullied as a child. By the age 15, he was living a homosexual lifestyle. When his relationship with other men ended and left him unfulfilled, he turned to drug use and abuse to cope. Eventually, his inner turmoil led him to take on a transgender identity as Scarlett. It led to a continued pattern of promiscuity with other men and performing at drag shows. He eventually came into contact with 2 mentors, a college professor and a pastor, who encouraged him in his faith journey despite continuing to live a double life outside the church. By the way, there are laws right now in Canada and America that will put a pastor in prison for trying to counsel somebody who's a transvestite or somebody who's trying to change their identity and their sex. One night, he broke down and asked God, "Will I ever live for you?" He said he heard God physically reply to him, "Yes, you will live for me." McCall soon gave up his transgender and homosexual lifestyle. It was a lot to handle, he said. I had to explain to people that it wasn't about becoming straight. It was a choice not to follow sin. The alcoholic, transgender, homosexual, prescription drug life I had was not what God had created me for. Man, if there's ever good news, it's what's happening in the backlash, what's coming from this woke culture. Thank God that God is still on the throne. Amen. That is in the news for tonight. I'm going to